we now have a generation that believes everything we did by colonising. Yes, it is true. They think everything about colonisation was wrong. It wasn't. There were some terrible things, and there were some good things to come out of it. And that is about properly acknowledging your past.
Education.
Yes, completely.
Sanitation.
Transportation.
There was so much that we brought to communities. But you see, you're typical of what we're talking about.
No, I'm saying that colonisation, the empire was wrong. It was wrong, full stop. That's, the things that Britain might have done.
But that's very much through your modern sensibilities,
yes.
You might say that, because we wouldn't now routinely go into other countries.
It was a profoundly racist set of basically invasions of other people, where we subjugated people to our rule and sort of made them work for us. It was completely
made their countries work.
But imagine yourself in the shoes of a 13-year-old boy hearing you say that.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
What do they then... How do they then carry that through life?
Well,
in terms of who I am as a Brit.
But it's not about...
We had racist ancestors.
Say it,
but Bev...
But I'm saying that we hear much more of that than we do about the benefits of that period of time.
Well, because I don't think there were benefits. I think that we have to be completely...
Of course there were.
So benefits to us.
I don't think there were.
There were benefits to us.
A lot of those countries did not... Jonathan, those countries...
It absolutely does.
Those countries did not have money. They did not have the creativity. They did not have people in positions of power
Of course they had creativity
No,
in
they
those
didn't.
countries. They just didn't live like Britain did. It doesn't make it worse. It just makes it different.
So it's okay to live without education, and it's okay to live without a transportation system, is it?
They did have education. It just wasn't our education system. They had language. It wasn't our language.
This cultural
medicine we brought to
precisely what we have.
Yes.
I don't know why we.
Hi guys, welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, my name is Maureen.
And I'm Maren.
Yeah, so in today's video, we're going to be reacting to a white woman who came on live television, and she was defending colonialism and saying how colonialism was a benefit to Africa and everywhere else that it happened. Right, this is where we normally say when you're talking about colonization, it feels like across different ethnicity, people viewed colonialism differently, because while black people view it from a different point of view, white people view it also from a very different point of view, and I feel like it's the education system, because they don't really teach about the real true historical facts. That is why you find white women like the one we're going to be featuring today speaking the way they do. So let's watch what we prepared for you, and then we come back and talk about it. Also, remember to subscribe if it's your first time here, and you can let us know in the comment section what your thoughts are on this episode. Let's watch.
We now got this bit with full plastic face on GB News talking about, we now got a generation who believes colonization was all bad. And then proceeds to say there were some bad things done by us, but guess what? There were some good things that came from it. And guess what she named? Apparently, sanitization, education, and transportation. She's literally a walking example of what came out from colonization. Saying this bullshit on a national television, but what do you expect as a GP News, but it still is a national television? Let me tell you a few things that colonization has brought to the world. Violence, poverty, extremists. And the West is still exploiting its former colonies. That's what colonization brought. The blatant disrespect and disregard, and how insensitive and comfortable she feels to say this. This is what colonization brought to the world. Wow.
I had no idea that you all were over there running amok like that. I actually think that the ones over here in this country have a little bit more self-awareness. Oh, and for the record, everything they mentioned, they got it from Africa and Asia. Infrastructure, architecture, hygiene. To this day, there are structures in Africa that have baffled everybody around the world. No one knows how all of those things were transported to those particular locations. And you want to tell me that you all somehow innovated transportation. You all didn't make us work for you. You depended on us. You stole resources, you stole knowledge, you stole art, you stole information. And to this day, you're still holding the majority of it in your museums and profiting off of it.
The reason why it's really important to address videos like this is because people who have had these belief systems have dominated the education system for centuries. They've been able to whitewash history. They've been able to bend and twist history to meet their narrative. A history that says white people created everything and everyone else was living quite a primitive life. And if it weren't for colonization and slavery, then we would have been lost. And we really need to bust these myths. So watch me mash her up now. The first thing they claim in this video is that Britain gave the world education. This is absolutely outrageous and it's not true. One, because the British don't even have their own script. English is Latin and the numbers we use are Arabic. So you don't even have the most basic thing you need in education, which is a language. The second thing to note is that before foreign or outside intervention, British people could not read. So between the 5th and maybe 14th century, 90% of Britain was illiterate. Only 10% of the British could read, and those people were the elite, the ruling class, and they were usually religious people. So now that we know how dunce people were in Britain, let's take our eyes off Britain and let's look at what pre-colonial Africa was like before the British arrived. So we know that Timbuktu in Mali was an intellectual hub and was a centre for Islamic scholarship. We know that the Benin Kingdom had some of the most skilled craftsmen in the world at the time. We know that Ethiopians built the first 3-story buildings and they had their own coin system. So Ethiopians were trading in coins when the British were still trading in carrots. India was obviously the leading country when it came to mathematics. So then they move on to talk about sanitation, which is absolutely outrageous because we know that the Dark Ages were called the Dark Ages for a reason. Europe was incredibly unhygienic. Even their medical practices were questionable. However, it was North Africans that had to bring soap to Europe because Europeans didn't use soap. We know that the Black Plague spread through Europe for a reason and it cost millions of people their lives. In fact, sewage systems weren't even created by British people, it's created by Iraqis. Now, if you want to talk about the Industrial Revolution, then yeah, you have a point in saying that the Industrial Revolution gave birth to steam engines and trains, and then that was brought to countries that were colonised by Britain. And of course, you would expect to make some advancement in countries where you've oppressed the people and not enabled them to be able to advance their own countries. If you really, really wanted to understand and get a clearer picture of who were some of the greatest contributors in the world, you would only need to go to the British Museum and see that nothing in there is from Britain.
So there you go, 3 ways that British colonialism apparently helped the countries that it colonised: education, sanitation, transport. So let's look at how Britain is doing now in education. Education system is failing for 11 to 16-year-olds according to the House of Lords. Sanitation, not very sanitary, rivers full of shit. Transport, HS2 is cancelled, and we seem to have a huge problem implementing large-scale transport infrastructure. That's why, because she's so principled and consistent in her politics, Carol Malone is now arguing that Britain should be colonised by China. Except of course she fucking isn't, because colonialism is never seen as something that should happen to us. It's never something that we would benefit from. It's only something that people benefit from if they're beneath us, if they're not capable of running their own systems. It's fascinating to me. The countries that have done incredibly well since colonialism, like Singapore, which has better transport, better education, and better sanitation than the UK, is not calling for the UK to come back again, because they have those things because they developed them, not because we implemented them. India doesn't have railways now because we built them out of the goodness of our hearts. We started railways in India because we wanted to take more of their stuff more quickly, and they still have those railways because they have continued to expand them and maintain them. Colonialism is such a great thing. Why is it never suggested as a solution to the problems that we face? Why is it only a good thing for other people and never a good thing for Britain?
Everything about colonisation was wrong. It wasn't. There were some terrible things and there were some good things too.
I robbed your house. But hey, don't you like how your house is now decluttered? And by the way, I have now left those tools that I used to rob your house with because it was handy for me while I was here. But you know, I don't need them now, and it seems like your house need those tools. So I'm gonna left it for you. What? What did you say? You will be able to afford those tools someday with your own income. You with your dumb mind? I don't believe you. If it weren't for me, your shitty house with all these unsanitary rubbish, you won't be able to afford those tools. You are not capable of having them. You're not capable of introducing them to your house. I deliver them to you, so you should be thankful. and also at the same time, because I was trying to figure out where the money is in your house, and I couldn't be bothered to read all those signs with the language I couldn't understand, so I forced you to speak my language to tell me where your money is. And hey, but now you're bilingual.
I've just watched a video on GB News. That was my first error around why we should speak positively about colonisation. Yeah, you heard me correctly. Conflictingly, I am going to repost the video that I'm referring to give you wider context, but basically they're saying if we never speak about the upsides about colonisation, how is a 13-year-old meant to feel good about themselves when they learn about the history? One member of that panel then went on to say that the upsides of colonisations was that it brought about transportation, sanitisation and education. Now, I know that colonisation happened beyond Africa and the Caribbean, right? But I can only speak from that perspective, because that's what I am, okay? The myth, the absolute dogshit myth that education was brought. Composure. The idea that education, sanitation was brought through colonialism is crazy to me, especially when it is very well documented that we've been having formal education, we've been having universities. Colonisation brought disease and wiped out. It's a Google search away. I can't even talk too much. Go and watch that video. It is the most but the thing is, guys, here's the gag. Here is the gag. I think it's really funny that a video around why we should speak positively around colonisation is now doing numbers around the same time that we're seeing what's going on over in Gaza. For those who have perhaps tapped in, tapped out of what's been going on over in Palestine, Israel is now occupying Gaza, okay? Brazenly. This is not me spreading misinformation. They say we're gonna be here for an unspecified amount of time. Occupation. And I can't help to think that the discussion around colonisation around the same time that we are seeing what we're seeing in Gaza. Yeah? Now I know that people that follow me will not be tricked by this. Part of colonisation is ethnic cleansing. Part of colonisation is removing the history. Yeah? GB News, what you are putting out as a talk piece is one of the most dangerous things I have seen you do.
We now have a generation that believes everything we did by colonising. Yes, it is true. They think everything about colonisation was wrong. It wasn't. There were some terrible things and there were some good things to come out of it.
Colonisation brought civilisation. What a sad conversation to still be hearing. I'd like to say I was surprised. I'd like to say this was AI, but neither of those things are true.
Education.
Yes, completely.
Sanitation.
Transportation.
Yeah. There was so much that we brought to communities. But
I'm also not surprised at the mouth that is coming from, because this woman is beyond problematic. The host, I have no idea who she is. Sanitation. Really? I thought by this point everybody knew that the Moors taught these people how to wash, bathe and brush their rotten teeth. But clearly, Carol didn't get the memo.
That is, but you see,
you're typical of what we're talking about.
No, I'm saying that colonisation, the empire was wrong. It was wrong, full stop. That's, the things that Britain might have done.
But that's very much through your modern sensibilities,
Yes.
you might say that, because...
Well, someone needs some sense, because clearly you ain't got any.
We wouldn't now routinely go into other countries.
Told ya. Not much between the ears with that one.
It was a profoundly racist set of basically invasions of other people where we subjugated people to our rule and sort of made them work for us. It was.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for speaking some sense. These countries were rich. They were richer before you came than when you left. Purposefully so.
Put yourself in the shoes.
Their countries work.
But imagine yourself in the shoes of a 13-year-old boy hearing you say that.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
What do they then? How do they then carry that through life?
Well,
in terms of who I am as a Brit.
But it's not about.
We had racist ancestors.
Say it.
But Bev,
But I'm saying that we hear much more of that than we do about the benefits of that period of time.
Well,
Young people don't need to feel guilty about colonisation. They just need to understand it so that they can learn from it, so that they won't repeat it.
Because I don't think there were benefits. I think that we have to be completely...
Of course there were. So you benefits to us?
I don't think there were.
There were benefits to us.
Spoken like a true coloniser. There were benefits to us. There were benefits to us. Thought they didn't bring you anything. Thought you didn't get anything out of colonisation. I thought you were the one bringing the benefits to these countries.
Countries did not, Jonathan, those countries,
it absolutely does.
Those countries did not have money. They did not have the creativity. They did not have people in positions of power.
Wow, did you really just say that? No, by the time you left, they didn't. But they were full of wealth before you came. You know, this is the caucacity that comes with these type of people. She will glorify the criminalisation of one set of people, but make this be another set of people, and oh, she would have a whole sub-story to tell. Massacring, essaying, looting, mass destruction to whole civilizations. You know, she was on the other foot. She would not be saying there were benefits.
Of course, they had creativity in those countries. They just didn't live like Britain did. It doesn't make it worse. It just makes it different.
So it's okay to live without education, and it's okay to live without a transportation system, is it?
Like, it's just the freaking lies and the whitewashing, no pun intended. Education, Africa. Sanitation, Africa. Transportation, Africa.
They did have education. It just wasn't our education system. They had language. It wasn't our language.
Yep, exactly that, Jonathan. Those countries that they're speaking of were always rich in minerals, rich in resources, rich in culture, rich in civilization, everything that colonizers didn't have. Why else would they have been there? Colonialism is walking into somebody's house, shitting on the carpet and saying, oh, I thought that would have been better as a bathroom there.
So guys, welcome back. Let us know what you think about this episode in the comment section. You know, okay, it's quite shocking to hear, but then again, it's not to hear some people speak like this, being that just a Google search away might tell you the true horrors of colonialism. And for those ones, I feel like it's the kind of education she got about colonialism. That is why she can be able to sit upright and talk about how beneficial it was to some countries. And when you look at, there's someone who brought a very valid point and asked, and there's someone who brought a very valid point and asked if colonialism was as good as she thinks, and if this was the solution to every problem, as she suggested, why don't they tell China to come and colonize them? Because right now China is doing better than them. Singapore seems to be doing so well, Would it then be fair, or would they also want to be in the same shoes as Africans or any other place that was colonized, so that they can come and do that in their country? Would she be okay with that? So that being said, I feel like this woman was speaking from an ignorant point of view, and she wasn't well informed, because just a Google search away can tell you the true horrific incidences that happened during colonization. Another thing I'm asking, why is it that when she's talking, she's trying to emphasize more on the good things that happened during colonialism? Like, I would like her to make a list of the good things and the bad things that happened during colonialism, and we see which would make the longer, the long list of the same, Right. And that is why I usually insist that if we truly want our own history to dominate, and for our own history to be taught to our own people, we must never forget what happened. And because people like her and her own people, they usually whitewash history to a point where I do feel like it is romanticized a lot what happened in the past, because right now you would never, as many of our speakers here today have said, you would never want someone to come into your own home and grape your kids, grape your wife, all in the name of they're bringing roads and educational system to your house or to your household, And then another thing that she said, or another thing that people said, and I took note of, was right now Black British people are speaking up, and they're speaking up a lot. And I really am very, very happy that they're no longer keeping quiet about these things, because I do feel like in as much as a lot of white people who think like her are coming up to speak, they only go unchecked and keep speaking like this and thinking that their way of thinking is the right way of thinking. But with many more people coming up to speak like the Black British people, at least it puts them in a position to also understand what Black people went through. Because right now, I do have a feeling that if tables were to be turned right now and Africa was, and this I'm just speaking as an hypothesis, right? If Africa was to colonize, let's say a country like France, because France is becoming a third world country and very fast, because someone was saying that right now from number 7, France dropped to number 32 in the global ranking, right? And some African countries have surpassed it, and right now it is no longer being considered as a first world country. So can you imagine a country like France, right? A lot of African countries right now, especially the ones that are doing well and are above it, go into that country and colonize their people, all in the name of bringing better education system, bringing better road and transport system, colonize them, and they commit the same atrocities that were committed here in Africa. Would they then keep singing the song of colonization is a good thing?
Yeah, and another thing the lady said there is that these countries that were colonized didn't have money, didn't have transportation, and they didn't have hygiene. So by colonization, those people brought all these things, which was life-saving for these countries they colonized. And I'm asking myself, do you know the concept of money? Like, yeah, it's true, it wasn't there, but people found a way to live. Why? Because they had barter trade. So the fact that these people didn't practice your way of living, or they didn't have the exact footprint to how you guys live, does not mean that their way of living was wrong, you know. And it's not like through the barter trade, they didn't get fair deals, because I doubt even if this woman knows that there existed such a thing as barter trade. You come with your cow, and I need, like, let's say, for example, 3 goats. If you have 3 goats, you want to get rid of it, and you want a cow, and I have a cow, and I want to get rid of it so that I can get the 3 goats. Like, that was what was being done in these societies. Another thing that I would like to disprove was when she talked about the transport system. Do you know, if there wasn't the fact that you wanted to build a railway system in a foreign country does not mean it was because they needed it so much. You built it because you wanted to exploit that country and take their resources. So in a sense, that was to benefit whatever you wanted to do in that country so that you can do it better, you know. But people had their own trade routes which they used, and they had their own modes of transport. For example, people used to use donkeys to travel. People used to use cartwheels that were tied on donkeys, or just other means of transport, just not like yours, in the one you had in your own country. That does not mean that they didn't have systems for transportation. They had. That is why someone from North Africa could travel to a place like, let's say, for example, East or South Africa to go and do their barter trade. Someone from South Africa could be able to go to West Africa. Did they travel through bushes? No. They had their own trade routes where they knew if they go to such and such a center, they're going to find someone to be able to trade their goods with. So, in essence, life was moving. The idea or the concept of money, I feel like, was brought about by colonialists in order to control the world. And that happened. That is why for some time, the dollar became the central system to be able to trade with throughout the world. So, in essence, money was brought not because these other places needed it so much or because they didn't have any other way of transacting, but because they needed a central way in order to be able to control the world. And that is how they arrived at a centralized banking system. But it doesn't mean that the life, I feel like we're in class right now, but I don't mind, because when you hear such people speak ignorantly, and the way she was speaking with conviction, you'd think that she knows it all, because according to her point of view, she's saying this generation is lost because we don't understand the importance of colonization and the good things it brought quite genuinely, I feel like she's the one who needs to really sit down and get educated about things. Somebody mentioned about the University of Timbuktu. People had their own systems of doing things. To be quite honest, when you hear such history, sometimes you might even not know, but until you hear somebody talk about it, and that is why there's a variety of creators on the internet, right? So the lady who was educating, I feel like she did a good job to kind of vocalize what was happening in Africa at that time, yeah. And I know some of them right now, if you tell them that white people didn't invent everything, they'd be literally be ready to debate you, because if you tell them that in technicality they were taught how to bathe, you know, they will debate you to the end of the world. When the evidence still lives to date, they still don't know. Some of their descendants still don't know even how to shower, because it's very hard to get rid of culture, you know. So if in our family or if in my country, it's quite cultural for us to, it's normal for us to be washing our feet before we get into the house. Or let me use the example of Muslims. They do wash their feet before they get into certain areas. That is cultural, and it's gonna be passed down to generations like that, you know. So I feel like for white people, not knowing how to bathe naturally, not for all of them, but a big majority of them do not know up to date to bathe, because they've carried that culture. And I'm not saying this to insult anybody. We've seen those videos on the social media where white people are talking and they are being asked, do you wash your feet? People say they don't wash their feet. They just let water run through and that's it. They've showered. That is not taking a proper shower. So if you mean to tell me you don't even know how to wash your body correctly, how are you going to bring sanitization to a different country, you know?
Right. And you know, when she said that, you know, the world should stop villainizing colonization. And she also said that children like 13 years old are very young to be learning about colonization, and furthermore, learning the bad parts of colonization. I usually do feel like it's very important for kids to learn this stuff, not only in the Black community, but all over white community and any other race, because it is in learning what happened in history that informs the future and the present, and it does make sure, it helps to make sure that things like colonialism and slavery never happen again.
Yeah, and I still say, you know, when you talk about wealth, okay, the point that she was trying to argue that her ancestors brought money to different countries and development. Partly it could be true, they brought development, because development in one country does not look like the same for when you go to a different country, you know. And that being said, also wealth looks very different. There was a point in history where up to today you can even find cultures or communities that still have those cultures where they consider wealth not in money but in the number of livestock you have and the number of children you have. There's still those communities that practice those traditions. So if you go into somebody's compound, finding a car is not what you consider wealth, but finding a huge parcel of land with animals feeding, you know, that is what they consider wealth, you know. So I'm saying it does not look the same across borders. So when she talks about they brought money, like during that time, I'm very sure even Africans and the other places they colonized they just saw it as paper. They didn't really value the money. She's very proud to say that they brought into countries as wealth. They could be able to still transact and move by and go on by their business, you know. So it looks very, very different. I would like to, I wish she could have been asked other than the transport, because if she's talking, she could only list 3 things, yeah? Transport, hygiene, and what else? Roads, education. That is the only thing she could be able to mention. So you take that versus the atrocities that were committed during slavery and during colonization. Can we talk about how people lost their lands because these so-called colonizers discovered a place, let's say, for example, Africa. They came, they discovered and took the best parts of the lands, and people ended up losing their homes. Could you attribute that to being something good? Of course, it was a disadvantage to the Black community. Maybe to their community it was a good thing. They gained things. That's how they gained wealth. But to the Black community, that was not good. You know, it's a long history of them losing things to colonizers. So they can never start praising colonization.
Right, so guys, let us know what you think about this episode, and also consider subscribing if you're new to our channel, and we'll see you on our next episode.